Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
When we transform Nebraska corn into ethanol, it doesn't disappear from the food supply. It just takes a little detour. Ethanol is made from the starch. The rest of the corn becomes livestock feed to create meat and dairy products, corn oil, sweetener, and other food ingredients, and maybe a little carbon dioxide to make your soft drinks fizzy. Homegrown ethanol helps satisfy America's hunger for energy and the world's appetite for feed and food. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Todd Hultman analyzes the Fed's interest rate decision. Aaron Berger talks about costs of production for cow-calf producers. Brian Krienke discusses common hurdles of data analysis. And Stephen Baenziger gives an overview of Nebraska's winter wheat crop. To start today, we're excited to announce Market Journal will begin airing nationwide in January. You'll be able to see this show on RFD TV every Thursday at 4 p.m. Central Time starting January 7th. This broadcast is in addition to our 3 weekly airings on NET in Nebraska and our weekly airing on the Rural Channel across Canada. You can find more information about the RFD TV edition on the Market Journal homepage. Todd Hultman from DTN is our corn and soybean market analyst this week. Land expense can dramatically impact a producer's chance for success. That was the topic of Todd's article on DTN this week. Todd found for corn producers who own the ground they farmed, corn never traded below the cost of production from January through November in 29 out of the last 40 years. However, if you rented the ground, 29 of the last 40 years fell below cost of production at some point, meaning success was far from guaranteed. We discussed that when we talked with Todd Wednesday, as well as soybean exports and his forecast for prices. But we began by asking about the Federal Reserve's decision earlier in the day to raise interest rates for the first time since 2006.
This has been a long time coming. Here we finally got it. We've been talking about it almost all year. The Federal Reserve did act. They raised that target rate 0.25% on each side. Overall, I can't say that it's going to have a dramatic effect on agriculture, except the bearish news of that is that it keeps bearish pressure for support for the U.S. dollar. The rest of the world is having a tough time, and as you know, the U.S. economy is doing relatively well compared to the world, so that keeps our dollar supported, and that makes it tough to export our grain.
Let's move down to Argentina and policy there. The new president, has reduced the soybean export tax from 35% to 30% and eliminated quotas on wheat and corn. Tell me how this makes Argentina a player now against Brazil and the U.S.
Well, obviously, it does liberalize their supplies somewhat, but I should point out that they don't have a lot of corn and wheat excess supplies at this time anyway. Their ending stocks are rather somewhat quite low on that count. For soybeans, which has been my main concern because they do have over 500 million bushels of ending stocks that they're anticipating in this current season, that would be the bigger bearish concern for the U.S. But the fact that they're keeping that soybean export tax up at 30%, I think is good news for our U.S. markets in the sense that it's going to prevent them from rushing out in any dramatic way. So the USDA just raised the export estimate for Argentina by about 500,000 metric tons. Not a big factor, and we might even get another 1,000,000 metric tons or more. But I don't think it's going to be a big bearish factor in 2016, certainly not what was feared before this policy was announced.
I want to talk about two articles that you recently wrote for DTN. The first is on soybean exports and the game between the U.S., Brazil, and Argentina for Chinese demand. Tell me how that's playing out.
At this point in time, as we just talked about with Argentina's policies, I believe the bulk of their soybean supplies are going to be kept out of the export picture as any big bearish concern for now. That leaves Brazil, and Brazil has already sold down quite a substantial amount of their supplies already because China's actually been a very aggressive buyer. You know, the headlines this year, we had a lot of concern about China's economy and what was that going to mean to soybean demand. But their soybean imports in China are actually up 15% this year, much of that coming from Brazil as a first supplier because Brazil's currency has favored those sales. But USDA is telling us that Brazil is going to have a very low amount of soybeans, 36 million bushels, as of the end of this current marketing season, which ends in January 30th. So for the next several months, it's going to be a one-on-one game, China versus USA, and we're going to have to see, is China playing possum a little bit with the pace of their US purchases right now, or do they have stronger demand ahead? My concern is that it's really going to come down to this weather in Brazil, and if the weather stays good, I think China will be able to hold out and keep a low price scenario for themselves. But if a weather problem were to emerge, we'd actually very quickly have a bullish scenario in soybeans if that were to happen.
The other article you wrote about land expenses and the cost of corn production. Tell me how land expenses can hurt your chances for success over time.
We all know that your cost of production is the real key to your profitability on the farm, and we all know that in any given year how that works out. But I think it would be mind-boggling to many of us to take a look at just how this plays out over the past 40 years and how it really dramatically impacts your ability to survive the various markets. I compared two different scenarios. One would be a farmer who owns his own land and has the best possible situation available, a very low production cost, with USDA's estimated production costs for using the full land expense. Those two scenarios are dramatically different over a 40-year period. The guy without land expense does very well almost every year and is rarely stressed by price. But on the other hand, the fellas that have to rent their ground, it makes a big difference. It's a much tougher shot, and I think one of the hardest things about what they face is that it's not too uncommon to have 3 or 4 year periods at a time where they simply don't have a profitable price offered to them. So it's a very tough scenario, and I think a very sobering message for anyone out there in farming, especially the young guys, about the importance of having to keep your costs down.
All right, the final question is the easy one, Todd. What's your price forecast for corn and soybeans?
Boy, for corn and soybeans, Jeff, I have to say it's very hard to be sanguine with everything going on. Not only do we have comfortable supplies, but the international currency market is really tilted against us. It's very tough to get any exports going at this time. It's all going to depend on weather. I think corn, basically, the supplies are not exorbitant, but they are comfortable, and we've gotten down to a cheaper price level here. I really thought we were going to reach $4 by the end of the year. I'm not so sure of that because demand just is not doing very well. The best thing going for corn is the reluctance of farmers to sell at these lower prices, and that could help. Soybeans probably has the biggest risk, and it's going to all come down to the weather in Brazil. If they have another good year, that's going to keep our soybean prices definitely under pressure. But as I mentioned earlier, if there's any significant threat to weather, that changes the whole game on soybeans very quickly.
Next week, Elaine Cubb will join us to look at corn and soybean markets, and Oklahoma State Extension livestock marketing specialist Daryl Peel will be with us to analyze cattle markets. The USDA is projecting U.S. cattle prices next year will drop 8% from 2015. The agency's expectation, released this week, is based on abundant beef in cold storage, poor foreign demand, and larger supplies of big cattle. The upcoming cattle inventory report will be released in a little over a month at the end of January. July's numbers showed a 2% rise in cattle and calves, the first increase for July since 2006. We recently talked with Nebraska Extension educator Aaron Berger about the tight margins cow-calf producers may face in 2016 and how useful it can be to determine costs of production.
So we know our cost of production as we think about a cow-calf operation. It really gives us some power for making management decisions and also marketing. That really helps us as we know where we're at in relation to where things are at. Helps us think about our input costs, where we can make some management changes to drive that operation where we want to go.
So how can you determine your cost of production?
Well, obviously first you got to have some good production records and financial records in place, and then we meld those together, and based on that we can get a handle on what our unit cost of production is per pound of calf weaned per cow exposed.
Once you do determine your own cost of production on your operation, how can you use those numbers, implement them on your place to maybe make a plan for 2016?
Yeah, so we know our cost for production. We're going to be looking at what our inputs are, thinking about what are we getting in return for the dollar we spend. You know, when calves are bringing $3 a pound, we might think about our inputs a little differently than they are if we're getting $2 a pound. And so we'll need to scrutinize our inputs, put together some projections in terms of what do we think our cost of production is going to be on these calves for 2016, and then make some management decisions accordingly to try to drive things to where we can make a profit under current conditions.
What did the estimates show for estimated annual cow costs in Nebraska for 2015?
Yeah, so if you go to the beef.unl.edu website, put together a one-page sheet there, you'll be able to find that talks about kind of an estimated cost of production for central Nebraska based on current market values for inputs. The sobering thing to me really is if we include all costs, if we include cow depreciation, some interest, depreciation on equipment, include labor, replacement cost, we're somewhere around $1,000 in terms of cow costs. Now when we actually get to calf costs, not every cow weans a calf obviously, so we're honestly somewhere around $1,100 on annual cow costs that translated to calf produced, so we're around $1,100 for a weaned calf at this point if we include all those costs based on what I've got there. Obviously people's numbers are different, but that's kind of a ballpark number. Are there any costs in there that really stood out to you, Aaron, specifically? You know, a big one for us is feed cost, and that's obviously a big driver most of the time. Often around 60% of annual cow cost is feed cost. And in Nebraska, we've seen pasture rental rates really increase significantly over the last 5 years. The other thing that's really interesting, Jim Robb with the Livestock Market Information Center has got a good slide that shows annual cow cost for the United States as a whole. And what's interesting to me, go back to 2004, somewhere around $400 was the estimated annual cow cost, including pasture rent. Now we're somewhere close to $800, and so over the last 12 years, basically doubled annual cow cost. The thing that's really concerning to me a little bit, if we go back to 1985, over that 20-year period, we only increased cow cost about $100 over that 20 years. Over the last 12 years, we've increased it about $400. So this cost side of the deal has really become an issue for us, I think, in the cow-calf production business.
So you mentioned how costs had increased, but how has profitability changed for the cow-calf producer over the last few years?
So we really see some really wide ranges over the last several years. Obviously, go back to 12, and the drought was challenging for many producers. Recovery from that in 13. 14 is probably going to go down historically as one of the best years ever for cow-calf producers in terms of the value that they got from their calves. You know, I was looking yesterday, many calves sold in the fall were approaching $3 per pound on a steer calf for a 500-pound calf, and you know now we're down around somewhere close to $2 a pound, and we're looking at $500 to $600 less gross revenue in 2015, depending on when you sold your calves per head, than we did in 2014. So with the cost I see right now, if you're putting in market value for inputs, we're in a place where we're close to break even, and as things trend down, it's going to require some challenge from a management standpoint to make a profit.
On the Market Journal website, you can find more resources on determining costs of production, including the estimated annual cow cost for central Nebraska in 2015. The December Nebraska Farmer says when you combine this year's heavy rainfall and the range of soil types in different parts of Nebraska, you've got a recipe for extreme variability. This month's issue says when it comes to managing variability, many have profited from variable rate seeding, but depending on the year, the payoff can differ. To see how well it worked in specific parts of the state this year, you can check out the December Nebraska Farmer. With the corn and soybean growing season over, many growers may be poring over all the data they collected throughout the year as they look ahead to 2016. But Nebraska Extension educator Krienke says getting truly useful information from that data might be easier said than done. We talked with Brian earlier this week to learn how farmers could get more out of the material they gathered.
There's a ton of data, like you said, and there's so many different layers of information, especially the yield data would be number one to start considering. And going into this next year, I'm a soils guy, so I'm really interested in soils information, especially when we're talking about fertilizer application. To get that yield to help you make good decisions on maybe where it'd be more profitable or not profitable to put that fertilizer. And so yield monitoring gives us that ability, but a lot of pitfalls with that data happen because it's not clean data, it's junky data, computers screw up, across all the brands there's issues, and so we really need to talk about how to get through that and clean it so it's appropriate to use and interpret.
What are some of those common pitfalls that a lot of growers face?
Well, I would say the number one thing is failing to calibrate the monitor. And there may be very little we can do at this point if it wasn't calibrated during the season. But when people are trying to evaluate, say, varieties or hybrids and things like that, if they want to make a good decision on which hybrid did better, but they didn't calibrate one hybrid and the other one separately, they may not be able to compare those and may be informing themselves inappropriately, so to speak, with the data. It may be misleading with the information they're getting. So it's crucial for calibration. So that's for next year. But the other thing is there's just erroneous data that needs to be cleaned out. And there's ways to clean out that waste. There's software programs. You can even do it in a spreadsheet if you're so willing. It's pretty tedious, but it really needs to be done if you're going to take this information and make it actionable, intelligent decisions from that.
You mentioned your background is in soil. What about soil data that you might get, how you might be able to use that for the next growing season?
Right. So if you had the opportunity to take fall soil samples this year and you didn't put on fertilizer yet, or maybe you did, or you're waiting till the spring for, say, nitrogen or phosphorus and so on with the other nutrients, that's a piece of information we can use and turn those points into a map that can then be used to guide fertilizer decisions. And so that sounds a lot easier than it really is. And so it really takes diligent kind of guidance going through and turning that into what we call an interpolated map to actually make a recommendation from. And so that's no easy task. Software has to be there to help us do it, but there's a lot of pitfalls with using that data.
Nebraska Extension is holding a series of workshops, the Precision Ag Data Management Workshops, January and February across locations in Nebraska. What might one learn by attending these workshops, Brian?
Loads of stuff, but it's important to note that this isn't going to be everything. It's just it's an introduction to that conversation. So we have 2 days. The first day is really for more beginners with the software, and then the second day is for more advanced topics. We go through yield editing, which is absolutely critical, first step. We talk about as applied data, multi-layer information, bringing in soils, aerial imagery, crop canopy sensors, nitrogen management, that kind of thing. And so we go through easier forms of that and more complex forms. We teach a little theory about what we're thinking, but then most of it is hands-on, how to, there's at least 4 of us staff in these things trying to help out and answer questions. And the conversation, of course, doesn't have to end there. You can always call us, but this is a good way to get their minds going and working with it, especially before this next growing season when there's still time to hopefully do something.
Those workshops will take place in Meade, Norfolk Clay Center, and Gothenburg in January, February, and March. Pre-registration and an attendance fee are required. You can find more of that information through a link on the Market Journal website. Nebraska experienced different forms of precipitation on the east and west ends of the state this week. Daily rainfall records set Sunday in Omaha and Lincoln helped move each city to the 2nd and 3rd wettest Decembers on record, respectively. And in western Nebraska midweek, significant snow fell, including totals around 1 foot in parts of the Panhandle. The state's winter wheat crop, with 63% rated good to excellent at the end of November, is now mostly supplied with adequate moisture. Only 5% of Nebraska is classified as abnormally dry, according to the latest U.S. Drought Monitor. Earlier this week, we talked with UNL's Stephen Baenziger to get an outlook and recap of the winter wheat growing season to this point.
Basically, for a lot of the state, we're fairly dry going into the planting season. And the best growers, I think, we were able to prepare a pretty good seed bed. Some of the growers, despite their best intentions and their skills, really had some rough seed beds. So most of the wheat, I think, got in. Most of it got up pretty well. Then we got some timely rains, and so I think by and large the wheat crop looks excellent. But there are a few spots where the ground was rough. I had a hard time getting it in properly. There was enough moisture, the crop germinated, and the rain came a little bit late, and so it dried up and died. So there's going to be some, not a lot, but there's going to be some in Nebraska that was harmed by the drought.
As you start to see it coming out in the spring, what are some things to look forward to?
Well, I think that's a great question, because the way the fall has set us up, in general, I think most of us have enough moisture, okay, but it's been warm. Now, there's a number of things that can happen due to that. The first one is, till you have a killing freeze, you're always liable to have Hessian fly. But I think the freeze came about not too late, but so there could be some Hessian fly. And you'll see that as green, very dark green, stunted plants in the spring, and then they'll be rosetted, they won't grow up. The other one that I think we'll see in the east with a warm fall, and if you plant it on time, if you plant late, you tend to miss it, but if you plant it on time with a warm fall, soil-borne mosaic virus is transmitted by a root fungus, and the fungus stays active longer in warm soils. So we may see a higher level of soil-borne mosaic virus than what we have normally seen.
What did a warm fall in that western part of the state do?
Well, the disease that I would be worried about there is wheat streak mosaic virus, because the mite may have still been active longer than normal. You know, the mite's everywhere, and it vectors the disease or carries the disease. And so if it's active, it could be bringing it in. You won't see that one again until the spring, and usually till it warms up nicely.
Are there any concerns with perhaps a warmer winter due to El Nino, those above normal temperatures affecting the wheat crop at all, or not getting the snow cover necessary?
It will depend upon how cold it gets. Last year there was a lot of winter killing. And in the winter killing, what happened was, it wasn't that the temperatures were too cold, but from warm to cold was too quick. And so right now I feel good. I think our crop is hardening off. We're generally down around freezing most nights. If we can gently go into cold spells, that's great. What I would worry about is if we had, in December, a few 80-degree days followed by some 10 above degree days, that would really hurt us.
What were some of the disease problems that growers faced last year that they really had a hard time getting a handle on?
Well, the biggest one in the east by far was Fusarium head blight or scab. And that's one with, it happened, we had continuous rain basically from May 1st to June 15th. In the east, we normally flower around May 20th, maybe a little earlier in the very southeast corner, a little later. And so we were just wet the whole flowering period. So A, it would be hard to put a fungicide on. B, the price of wheat was $4 a bushel. You're not sure you could afford it. Everybody who sprayed ended up making money by the spray. And you also have to be very good about what spray you use. Some fungicides are very effective against Fusarium head blight, some not so much, and some actually enhance the mycotoxin that comes with the disease. So you want to use Carumba, Prosaro, Folicure. Those are the three that are traditionally used to reduce Fusarium head blight and also the mycotoxin.
Now with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension state climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we again for the weekly forecast. Of course, during this past week, we had two significant storms that moved through the Central Plains. The first one brought some heavy precipitation to portions of south central, southeast, and east central Nebraska in the form of rainfall, with a little bit of light snow at the very end of it that was turned into a mushy mess. We had more significant snowfall, of course, portions of central Nebraska. And then the second system kicked out during the midweek period that dropped some significant snowfall across portions of the Panhandle and the western Sandhills. So when we look at this precipitation event from the first storm system, many locations received a winter's worth of precipitation with a single event, and we haven't even really begun winter yet. And in fact, in some locations of southeast and east central Nebraska, we could go precipitation free through the end of March and still be back to normal if we looked at the water year from October 1st to present. So we are having some significant surpluses built with this recent storm system, and unfortunately we don't look to see a very strong likelihood of a white Christmas, but the models have been playing around the last couple of days in regards to this system, and there's an outside chance, and we have to pay attention, that this storm system could be a little bit stronger. It's going to move through during the middle of next week and actually drop some more precipitation that's currently being forecasted. So let's take a look at the upper air models and see what our chances for a white Christmas are. We have a trough that is starting to move into the western United States that will start to make its way to the central plains. So for today, we're going to see some very warm temperatures for this time of the year, returning to above normal temperatures under fairly benign conditions, basically sunny to partly cloudy conditions. And as we go into tomorrow, we'll start to see that trough rapidly move into our region. So we'll drag a cold front at the surface. And there is a little bit of moisture with this, but it looks like it's going to stay to the south of Nebraska. But the only place that we might see some precipitation will be extreme southeastern Nebraska. And even there, it looks like it just be a few sprinkles. And that system moves toward the Great Lakes on Monday. And we basically see a small trough over the northern plains. But for us, basically, we'll be to the south of that boundary. It looks like fairly benign conditions, although we'll see a slight cooling trend. And as we get into Tuesday, there's indications that we start to see troughing action dig deeper down, bring some cooler air into our region, and we just need the energy to come out through it. So we're still looking at some basically non-precipitation type pattern on Tuesday, but as we get into Wednesday, we start to see a very strong push of cold air coming into our region if the models are correct, and that will generate the possibility of some light snowfall across the state. At this point, I can't say there'd be any accumulations if it does materialize, but the areas that the models are hinting at would be southeast Nebraska and portions of central Nebraska, and even then we'd be only looking at an inch or two at the most. And then on Thursday, of course, the system passes to the east of us. We'll stay in that cold northwest flow, so there might still be a few flurries. And then as we get into Friday, which is Christmas Day, all of a sudden we get another trough building back in with a ridge building up into our region, bringing much warmer temperature. So any of the little bit of snow that we get here in the eastern part of the state, if it does materialize, will likely rapidly melt. Now, as we look at the forecast for this week in terms of temperatures, we see the cool down to the weekend and into the early part of next week before a slight warm up as we get into Tuesday before the next system comes through and gives us a chance of those flurries, but nothing much in the way of significant accumulations, and then a warming trend on Friday. And as we look at the 8 to 14 day forecast, we see that the warm air remains in place over the east and the cold in the west, and in terms of precipitation, pretty much the entire lower 48 becomes wet with that big storm system moving into the central plains right after the Christmas holiday weekend.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews are available individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on corn and soybean markets, determining costs of production for cow-calf producers, data analysis, and Nebraska's winter wheat crop. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week by following us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Next week, Elaine Cubb will analyze corn and soybean markets, and Daryl Peel will look at cattle markets. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.